Today, I just got the message out loud that we're being recorded. It's a very local problem that got me engaged and led to Dorie being engaged in the gas issues and in Mothers Out Front in particular as a way to deal with them. We're going to talk about why gas lamps matter. I'm going to talk about that. Dorie's going to give us the bigger picture. We'll identify a few grounds for hope, some ways that we can help. And finally, I hope we'll have time for questions and comments. So now we can go to the first slide. We hope. And I should mention that I owe credit to my neighbor, Ania Camargo, who is not only the person who put together most of the slides that I'm using, but the activist on our street who helped me get into these issues. So you all know about the lamps on Beacon Hill. And when I was looking for a place to live, when I moved back to Boston in 1978, Temple Street was very appealing because it was freshly converted into Temple Walk with 16 trees and 16 lamps. Next slide. It became so beautiful that this was a huge poster in Logan Airport welcoming people to Boston. But next slide. The trees began to die. So you can see how lovely the street was in 2010 and how bleak it looks in this picture here. In all honesty, it doesn't look quite that bad today because there are some little trees that the city has planted to replace the 15 that died. I'm sorry, not 16, 11 that died. But it is still a pretty sad situation. Next slide. This is the view from my window. I used to have beautiful greenery to look out, as Joy described, and I don't anymore. So now when I look out the window, I'm thankful to have some leaves, but I'm sad as well. Next slide. This is one of the big reasons our trees are dying, which is that there are gas lamps all over Beacon Hill and all over the city. There are actually almost 3,400 gas leaks have been identified in the city of Boston. Next slide. This is a gas spectrometer. This is how you can tell whether there's dangerous amounts of gas in the soil because the trees are basically being asphyxiated. The methane prevents them from getting oxygen, which is what they need. And there's an amazing story really here. The man who developed this instrument and has done a lot of the measuring in conjunction with my neighbor Ania and Mothers Out Front used to work for the gas company. His job was identifying leaks and he got so fed up and so exasperated, he left the gas company and is now consulting with groups that care about not just about the trees, but the climate. Next slide, please. But there is a proposal, which is that we would use the same lamps, but replace the glass with LEDs. And so the Temple Street residents, spurred by my neighbor Ania, asked the city to undertake a pilot project. Next slide. Here are the key parts of the pilot. The city has actually approved money to get this pilot started. $400,000, we are assured, is in the budget. The city is committed to a public process. Because Beacon Hill is an historic district, the specific proposals would have to go before the Beacon Hill Architectural Commission. And you know, there are a lot of people on Beacon Hill who don't like change of any kind. And of course, everybody is concerned about what the lights would look like. We wouldn't want glaring lights. We would want something that looks pretty much like the gas lamps we have now. And the good news is that Mothers Out Front people have identified there is in fact the possibility of recreating a very similar kind of light. And meanwhile, Mothers Out Front is actually measuring how much light different gas lamps project. But we thought we should sort of start paving the way. So some of us on Temple Street sent a letter to the Beacon Hill Times. And Dorie saw my signature on the letter, which is how we got her hooked. What's changed since then is that we now know we are going to have a new mayor. And I can't imagine that anything very serious is going to happen until the new mayor is at least identified and probably in office. Next slide, please. Oh, so what's happened to me? There should be language underneath these. But the middle one, it says the gas is explosive. And I have to look at my notes to see what the line under the first one is supposed to be. Oh, it tells you that, oh, there we go, you got it. 2,800 gas lamps. It's actually a fairly, it's a significant part of the emissions that the city of Boston produces. So it's worth fixing from that point of view, as well as many others. Next slide. Here's some of the reasons that gas leaks are a problem. They're bad for our health. They're really bad for the earth. Methane is worse than carbon dioxide in warming the earth. You can't mitigate the problem by good agriculture, as Bill Wilson showed us ways in which, good regenerative agriculture can minimize the carbon dioxide issue. And the gas gets wasted, but we're paying for it anyway. So repairing the gas leaks and replacing in some cases is essential if the city's going to meet the reduction goals. Basically, gas has got to go. And now we're over to Dorie's part. Thank you, Dorie.
All right.
And there's Kathy. Good.
I was going to add that another reason to fix them is often safety reasons, and the gas can build up, in under the ground in a confined space, in the dirt or somewhere else, and methane is a flammable fuel. Okay, so I'm going to share my slides here. And from the beginning. So, well, I joined, I was looking around for groups to get involved with. I joined Gas Leaks Allies, which Betsy's referred to. It's a group of about 25 different nonprofits. They're all environmental groups, but they have different interests. So Conservation Law Foundation, Sierra Club, HEAT, which is in Cambridge, that's really into measuring methane and figuring out ways to stop leaks. And there are independent consultants, arborists, and they've really had an incredible, they played an incredible role in shaping legislation in Massachusetts to address this problem. So I volunteered to do research and pull together information. Basically, the gas companies are regulated by the Department of Public Utilities, a little bit by the Department of Environmental Protection, but they make filings all year round with DPU, and you can go into those databases and pull out their reports, thousands and thousands of pages. But so part of my goal was to update the information that Gas Leaks Allies had with more recent information. But just to start out and to remind everyone that, there's nothing natural about natural gas except for when it's in the ground, deep down. When you pull it out, it's a fossil gas. It's carbon-based fuel that was formed millions of years ago from plants and animals and microorganisms. It has to be extracted. And as Betsy said, it's a really potent greenhouse gas. A good 30% of the Massachusetts greenhouse gas emissions are due to methane, 15% from combusting gas in our homes to heat them, to heat water, to cook, and then another 13% from leaks. Some of the gas, a small percentage, but it actually has a big impact on our pocketbooks as well as other things, but about 3% of the gas that's distributed into the system never makes it to our homes and businesses. It's leaked out along the way, but guess who pays for that? It's the ratepayer. So we've come to rely in this state very, very heavily on fossil gas. I'm calling it fossil gas because I just think it's a misnomer to call it natural. Half of the homes really in Massachusetts use gas for heating and hot water, et cetera. And, you know, our big uptake of this fuel has been driven by, you know, the easy availability of this gas and low prices. So we've all become really reliant on it. This amazes me. Emissions overall from greenhouse gases in the Commonwealth have declined by about a quarter since 1990 until 2018. But of the proportion that we're emitting, natural gas has come to occupy a good 24%. So the amount of natural gas emissions has increased by 60% over that period. So just to remind everyone, you know, where is this fossil gas from? Gas come from? It just appears in our houses. But basically, we import all of this gas. We don't mine any gas in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. 80% of what we use comes from fracking fields in Western Pennsylvania. And as you know, hydraulic fracturing is now the main way of extracting fossil gas in the United States. And it takes huge amounts of water, which often destabilize the water table from which the water is taken. And fracking produces highly toxic and frequently radioactive wastewater. And we've all heard about how it can also lead to micro earthquakes. So it has a sobering beginning, and then to make its way to our homes, which here we are down here at the bottom right-hand corner, it's a long journey, but basically it's transported through pipelines that are up to 60 inches in diameter across state boundaries. It's regulated interstate by the Department of Transportation. Once it comes into Massachusetts, it's the problem of DPU and the Department of Environmental Protection. But they're compressed, it goes to plants where it's refined. There's often a lot of loss in that process, intentional loss due to venting. It's piped through more pipes to compressor stations, which force it through the rest of the system. And sometimes it goes into LNG storage liquid, natural gas. You can liquefy the gas when you reduce it to a really low temperature. Sometimes Massachusetts hasn't had enough natural gas to heat our homes in really cold winters, and so we actually imported it from Russia in LNG containers. So the part that I've been researching is this last bit over here at the far right-hand corner. The term mains refers to the pipes in the street, and then services refer to more pipes that come off the mains and go to individual buildings or homes. And then of course there are meters, which measures the amount of fossil gas, and those can either be inside or outside the building. So it's a really complex distribution structure. And the problem for Massachusetts is that it's leaking pretty badly. So we have 21,000 miles of pipes in our state and about 1.3 million services and meters. We have basically the second oldest fossil gas infrastructure of any state in the country. And you know, I like history a lot, so it was really interesting for me to learn that in the beginning, we didn't have natural gas, we had manufactured gas, which was made from coal. It was distilled from coal in big heating vats, and that was considered dirty gas. And when that went away in the 20th century, or the late 19th century also a little bit, the difference in the two fossil gases was, one was called manufactured and one was called natural. But wrought iron pipes were the first material that was used, followed by cast iron in the early 1900s, and then unprotected steel. And then finally in the, starting the 60s and going through the early 80s, a certain kind of plastic made by DuPont. The material now that's used to replace pipes is more dense plastic. So poor Massachusetts. So we have basically 7 investor-owned entities that distribute gas. You know, I won't go through all of these, but obviously we know National Grid here. National Grid also does the North Shore heavily. It does Cape Cod, except for the Outer Cape. And then the other big company is Eversource, which now owns all the yellow as well as all the green. And then there's Berkshire Gas out here in the western part of the state. And then there are 2 municipal gas companies. So the worst leaks are happening in the city of Boston. It's really quite striking. So this pie chart shows each gas company's share of total leaks in the year, it was at the year 2020. And you can see Boston Gas, which is basically the subpart of National Grid that accounts for the metropolitan Boston, is responsible for 58% of the leaks. And then Columbia Gas is also part of National Grid. So, and then the next biggest owner of these leaks is Eversource, which consists of NSTAR over here at 18%, and then Bay State. So last year, no, it was in 2019, of all the leaks in the Boston area, there were 8,367. Half of those were grade 1 leaks, which is the most hazardous kind. If you have a grade 1 leak, you're supposed to fix it right away. And then 271 were considered significant environmental impact. And Gas Leaks Allies and this other group, HEAT, have worked hard to get the state to commit to forcing gas companies to repairing SEI leaks. They have to do it within 2 years, but they're not spewing out gas in a way that's going to blow up a building, but they're really letting go a lot of gas. This is sort of a contrast to the map that Betsy showed. This shows, I don't know what tools capture this, but this is the Boston area, and it's showing atmospheric leaks of methane. Of course, the gas leaks are not affecting all of us in a similar way. So this, again, is just the National Grid service territory. And you can see that Blacks are living in areas that have twice as many leaks as white people. So, you know, the Conservation Law Foundation is asking that the rules be changed so that a criteria for selecting high priority pipe also include this EJ classification. Here's sort of a snapshot of how many miles have been replaced and how much it's costing in the initial year. So the program in Massachusetts that has been implemented to address these leaks is called Gas System Enhancement Program. The acronym is GSEP. So that's the thing I've been researching. The goal of this program, which was instituted in 2015, is to replace the extant inventory of leaking pipe as measured in 2015, over 6,000 miles by the year 2035. And you can see so the blue line here is how many miles have been replaced each year. And basically right now there's about 220, a little over 200 miles are being replaced. They are supposed to be replaced in 2021. Things went more slowly with COVID in 2020. You can see that we're up to replace a couple hundred miles is costing us about $570 million. But the important thing to understand is that this isn't the sort of repair that's expensed in 1 year. It's amortized over the lifetime of the pipes, which is usually considered 30 to 40 years. And the gas companies and their investors earn a rate of return that's on the order of 9 to 10%. So they get to essentially be paid back a little bit each year for their capital investment in year one. And that payback at the end of time is fully loaded with a very generous rate of return. The ratepayers also pay for property taxes as well. So we have a lot more pipe to replace. We're 20% through the 6,000 mile goal. So, you know, are we making any progress on the leaks? I've whacked my head against the wall trying to come up with the data that exists around this. Clearly, if someone's out here on Mount Vernon and they replace a block's worth of pipe that had a bunch of leaks in it, then those leaks are more controlled. There's actually a recent paper which shows that when you replace a section of pipe, about 30% of the leaks never come back, but 30% of them do. And then 30% start happening near, because you can imagine you're shaking up all this old infrastructure, you're disturbing the soil. So it's not, you know, like going in and having a heart valve replacement. It's messy. But you can see with the bar chart on the right that at best, in terms of the number of leaks, we're just kind of doing a lot of activity and we're kind of keeping up with the problem, but there's no strong turnaround in the number of leaks. So we entered 2016, we have 35,000 leaks. Over the course of the year, we get rid of this many, all right? And then we have this many, I'm sorry, we get rid of this many, but then we carry over to the next year this remaining amount, and then more leaks happen. So it's sort of a whack-a-mole game. If you take a leak ratio and you calculate the number of leaks that a company experiences in 1 year divided by their total stock of miles, you can, you know, a leak ratio to some extent tells you whether or not you're prioritizing the right miles, the right things to replace. And there are a couple of smaller companies that have actually had declining leak ratios, but that's not the case with National Grid or Eversource. So GSEP is got a lot of problems, and I forgot to say back a little bit. Basically, my work is showing that if you were to depreciate all this, these new pipes within a 15-year period of when they're installed, that we're looking at basically another big dig type project in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We're looking at about $20 billion. That's my rough estimate of what it would cost if we finished doing all these pipes and fully depreciated them within a 15-year time frame. So I've been able to show in my work that they're just really escalating costs. For example, National Grid in the city of Boston, unit cost of replacing 1 mile of pipe has gone up 50% in the last 4 years. Eversource is projecting a 7.5% increase in unit costs over each of the next 5 years. The big driver of these increased costs is because all these companies are fighting for the same contractors. And also because I think what's happened is the gas companies have chosen the low-hanging fruit, all right? So they haven't really tackled the leaks so much that are in the inner city, so to speak, in the sense of dense urban areas. And it's much more expensive to do this work in dense urban areas. So Boston Gas, which is part of National Grid, is on record saying its unit cost for replacing a mile is $2.5 million. Whereas out in the Berkshires, it's about $700,000. So it's just really expensive in the city. So with decarbonization, with the state's net zero goals and with the state's commitments to electrification, you know, basically the Commonwealth wants to electrify 1 million households in the next couple of years. The question is whether this fossil fuel infrastructure makes sense anymore. And if it doesn't, if we're going to, in some sense, decommission it, then becomes the financial problem of stranded assets, because the companies have these assets on their balance sheet. But if by 2050, we're going to throw them all out, then the question is, well, who pays for them? Because you can't just walk away from an obligation to these gas companies. So one scenario, which seems to me to make a lot of common sense, is that people who can't afford it will electrify, and they'll, you know, Betsy and I will bet I'll get off my little natural gas heater and I'll take out my gas burners and I'll go buy an induction stove, and I'll be, you know, I can afford to make those changes, and that it'll be lower income neighborhoods that are left holding the bag, that are basically saddled with paying for the sunk costs of the system. So it's a big lesson in sort of state bureaucracy and how people don't take a holistic view and work together across agencies, because I swear to you, this GSEP program is not aligned with the state's decarbonization goals, not yet. There's a process that's sort of just getting going called, what we call it 2080, which is the filing number for the case at DPU, but the gas companies have hired a consultant to help think about what kind of business models might be viable in the future, given the Commonwealth's goals. But that report's not due until 2022. So yeah, and another piece is the changing relative prices of gas and electricity. Basically, we're just at this tipping point where gas is becoming, electricity is becoming cheaper than gas. This graph is actually about the cost of rates, not so much the prices, but you get the point. And you know, the cool thing about electricity in Massachusetts is that it's increasingly becoming green. About 50% of electricity now in Massachusetts does not emit greenhouse gases. And by 2030, it's supposed to be 75%. So that's a fuel that can become greener. But what this graph shows, it's a forecast by the Conservation Law Foundation, is that it's predicting 100% increase in residential gas rates over the next 20 years and a 50% increase in electricity rates. In part, gas rates are being driven up because of the GSEP program, because at the end of the day, it's the ratepayers who pay for this stuff. So I'm going to cover this slide, and then Betsy's going to walk us through kind of stuff that we can do. This slide is just to underscore that we're lucky to live in a state that has made a serious mandated commitment to net zero by 2050. And then Boston always replicates the state's targets. So for the state as a whole, in addition to the 2050 goal by 2030, the mandated statutory goal is to cut our emissions by 45% relative to 1990 levels. The city's having trouble reaching the goal that it had set for itself to reduce emissions by 25% by 2020, but otherwise, you know, it has in place not statutory goals, but the goal of net zero by 2050. And I think one of the citizen points to remember is that these are great goals, they're ambitious, but they only make sense if you can have policies in place to affect them. And so far at the state level and at the city level, we don't have that. And we need citizen pressure to make plans to get off gas. So Betsy, I'm going to switch it back to you now to walk us through these next couple of slides. Betsy, you're on mute.
So before I do that, we did promise you to give some hints of hope. And to me, the fact that Massachusetts has already passed this strong climate bill is a big step. And the bill is not very specific about how you make the transitions or reach the emissions. There's all kinds of interesting and important legislation coming in the works to address those issues. And one of them in particular is something called the Future of Heat Act, which we'll be asking you to support when the time comes. I just find inspiration from people like my neighbor, Ania, who has, with the Gas Leaks and the Gas Leaks Alliance, has really been coming up with some innovative ideas, including the proposals in the Future for Heat Act. And it's become, other states are looking at that model and considering very similar changes. The core of the proposal is that you could use the same systems to deliver geothermal heat and not, they would be in the heat business, not in the gas business. But, and to have a little thing like our trees dying and find out that there's a way that we can address that issue is, small, but important to some of us. So personally, face the reality that gas is going to get more and more expensive, and do what you can to use as little as possible. And there are these options to have more of your electricity come from renewable sources. And in Boston, not all of you are Boston residents, but Boston is actually buying electricity as a collective. So all we have to do is opt into the Boston organized program. And you have a choice of making it 100% if you can afford it. It does make a difference. I happen to have electric heat, and I decided it was it was maybe not the best way to spend a few $100s but I may reconsider that. We have, Dorie in particular has seen some excellent resources on how to electrify your home. Geothermal is something I'm barely learning about. We know that Steve Courtney has designed a building which is going to rely completely on geothermal and almost completely. It'll have a backup arrangement. And then if you happen to be, people who have investments can use environmental social governance standards. There are various programs out there doing that, and many investment brokers, or not brokers isn't the right word, investment counselors have access to such tools to evaluate whether your company is, because the core concept is that if you aren't good on environmental, social, and governance issues, you probably aren't going to be in a good state for your business for very long. And then collectively, we have some opportunities as well. And as Dorie mentioned, really one of the big things is just lend our support wherever it can make a difference. Mothers Out Front is planning to look for all the trees that have been damaged by gas and record how close they are to gas lamps. And they may need some volunteers to help do that. If it turns out we need more when it gets organized, I'll let you know. We have, Sylvia and I both attended a, Boston Globe had a Zoom forum with all the mayoral candidates focusing specifically on energy and environmental issues. The good news is that they were all saying all the right things and rated that as a, as among their highest priorities. We have some language to hold them to when the time comes. And there were quite a few good ideas there that I wasn't familiar with before. On the state level, Mothers Out Front is active, for example, in pushing specific legislation, and we'll show you a slide on that. I think it's just really, I attended a meeting recently with Jay Livingston, who's the representative for much of Beacon Hill and Back Bay too, I think. And it's clear that this kind of input from groups that they have learned to trust as having good information is valuable to them. And then, you know, I think we'll just be posting things to the Kings Chapel Environmental Board when there's an opportunity for you to speak up on one of these issues.
Betsy, can you mention the Mass General?
Oh, yes. So for example, Mass General is planning, it's got a proposal in the works for 2 huge new buildings, which they are planning to heat by gas, which they're going to have to replace in, you know, in the next whatever period of time. It's stupid, wasteful, all the rest of it.
That there's a letter writing campaign around
Yes,
that.
if you'd like to write a letter to Mass General complaining, we can send you the template. And there's a public hearing coming up, I think on June 7th, which is focusing apparently on the, you know, the surrounding issues like traffic and transportation and stuff like that. So there's a lot going on. I mean, and we've got all kinds of, these are the ones that Mothers Out Front is featuring. They've kind of, their campaign for this year is called Clean Heat and Clean Air, but we've added healthy soils as well, because they're also important. And I've been impressed by Mothers Out Front. I think they're attentive to, you know, trying to identify the best use of our time. And they have many people who just show up when they're asked to respond, like writing a legislator. But Dorie and I have both become more regularly involved in that. I just want to mention one thing on the replacement process. I didn't mention earlier that the gas company is actually now replacing the gas main on Temple Street. We got notice of this 2 days before they started. It is expected to take 6 months. And I can easily believe it's costing whatever outrageous figure Dorie gave us. And we're a little suspicious. We think it might well be related to the fact that Temple Street is trying to convert the gas lamps to electric. Questions, comments? You can unmute yourselves and pitch in. Joy.
So what would be the renewable sources of electric energy that could be used at the parish house and parsonage? I mean, we cannot put, you know, what do we call it? The, I'm sorry, the solar panels. I can't put panels on my, you know, yeah. So what does that mean?
Well, the option is really through the Boston Clean Consumer, I'll have to look it up and send you the specifics. I forget the exact name, but basically Boston as the city decided to buy electricity collectively. And we got letters earlier giving us a chance to opt out and pay the minimum. Opt-in is an improvement over the amount of renewable and electricity. And then you can also opt for 100%, which depending on how much electricity you use could be minimal or substantial. But I can send you more information on that. I did the calculations under the rates at the time, and it was, you know, it was so many, I couldn't figure out it was so many cents a kilowatt, and I could look up how many kilowatt hours I'd used in the last year. At the moment, I think the hope is most of it will come from wind. There's one of the hopes has been for a hydropower, you know,
water
coming through Maine, but there's a lot of dissent in Maine and New Hampshire about providing the space for that pipeline.
Maybe Stephen could comment as well, because we have to switch out the burners, which are natural gas, right, Stephen, in the parsonage and
they are
parish house. So we have to use some kind of air source heat pump.
Yeah, the big system there is the furnaces. That's our big user. We're not using that much for stoves or hot water. It's the furnaces that are of issue. We do have a unique opportunity to do a geothermal solution there, however. Unlike most people on the Hill who really don't have that option.
Is that because there's a yard?
That's correct. It's easy to get to. Any new building that's, for example, MGH, I'm just kind of curious why they haven't fully explored, and maybe they have geothermal. I know there are lots of high-rise buildings that are going primarily geothermal. So it's not a matter of height or density, that sort of thing. Now, the geological situation there is probably pretty wet. I'm not certain if that impacts it or not.
I don't know
But they
even,
may not have ever really seriously explored it. I mean, because it is really now just the cutting edge for what most of the large firms are looking at.
I'm guessing that that's the reason. And I know that also Boston has been working on ordinances that require new buildings not to use gas, and somehow MGH gets in just under the wire for avoiding. I wish I could be more precise, but there's something of that sort in the story.
Well, the interesting thing is, I don't know why they would be trying to avoid it. I mean, if the studies that I've seen are quite often it's a neutral cost point. It really doesn't cost at most, maybe 1% of the construction costs upgrade. Yet if you look at the long-term costs, it's much simpler system to maintain and keep clean and all that. So I
My
think
guess is they made their plans when it didn't seem like such a practical option. Whether they
true.
get it or not is another one, but it's worth writing.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Joy, you said we can't add solar panels. Why is that? Why can we not?
So I turn it over to Stephen, but you can't, anything that's visible from the street cannot be
Right.
used. So it would be a question of a flat
The
roof.
historic district.
Yeah, but if they were just flat, I don't know if they'd pick up I don't know if they'd be at the right angle. I don't know. What do you think, Stephen?
There are some places that we could install some solar panels on the roof, but towards the back, those flat roof portions. But most of our roof is sloped, half of it's sloped towards the north. So that was totally, really wouldn't work at all. And then the other side is towards the public view, which will never fly, or at least in the current context, not fly. Although, again, collectors are changing their appearance significantly.
Yeah.
And so there may be, in fact, an option at some point that makes sense that really is not objective, not a problem historically at all. Essentially, it looks very much like the existing materials that we would already have on the roof.
I want to mention just one detail on electrifying, which is that while my daughter's planning to convert her electric stove to propane. So we're having some conversation about that. But in the process, Ania, my activist neighbor, lent me an induction cooktop. And I tried it and I was impressed by it. But the point I want to make is you can try it out for 50, if you could borrow Ania's, she will lend it to anybody. Or you can buy one at IKEA for $50 or a fancier one from, I think, Cuisinart for 100 and something. So it's, if you're tempted, but uneasy about induction cooking, you have a chance to sample it without breaking the bank.
The thing that strikes me about this talk, and I came in, I'm very sorry, halfway, was, in our project in Danbury, we think we're doing a great thing, geothermal, we have backup with gas. I didn't realize that our backup with gas is really driving to keep that infrastructure in place and future leaks and all that sort of thing. And maybe we should have looked at our other option is a diesel backup generator. Maybe that's better in the holistic sense of things, of not having to have that gas infrastructure to feed our building. I mean, it's already there. It's not going to go away. I don't know. It's an interesting conversation that I just love in some ways, how complex these things are. The common sense is not necessarily the real sense.
Barbara, I saw your hand up, but you're on mute.
Or do it. Okay. Hi, Betsy. How can we tell if a tree has been affected by gas? Do you know?
Well, aside from getting the spectrometer and the gas people there are some characteristic kinds of damage. They tend to be damage to the crown. One of the ways to, I mean, there are other, we can't blame gas for all the trees that are sick in Boston, because obviously construction and salt and other things are factors. Drought is a factor, but I will see what I think I've seen some stuff that is fairly specific to trying to identify the ones where gas is a problem. Another sign that a tree is sick, we were talking about this earlier, because there used to be a fairly large tree in front of the parish house and the parsonage that Joy enjoyed looking at. It had a lot of suckers. And that's a sign that the tree is under stress. When there are a lot of suckers coming up from the trunk, it means it's trying somehow to keep itself alive. So that's a sick tree. I don't think it guarantees that it's sick from gas, but it's a sick tree. And
Well,
that happened to my first cherry tree that I gave to the parish house garden too.
Well, what gas are we talking about? Where's it coming from?
Oh, and there's a gas lamp right near the bad trees on the.
Oh, yes, I saw that on the news. Yep. Okay.
So I think you were a little late coming in, but the first part was really.
I'm sorry. I lost my sunglasses in the subway. I had to go get them. Thank you.
The Mothers Out Front group does intend to measure as many trees near gas lamps, measure the gas in the soil of every tree near a gas lamp that looks sick.
Lamps, okay.
And they're not just on Beacon Hill. They're in Charlestown and parts of the South End and the Back Bay and so forth. There's even some in Dorchester, I think, or other parts of the city that we don't usually think of as having.
Barbara, I'll make sure that when we get these citizen action teams together to go tag trees, I'll make sure that you know about it. And then I think there'll be a training that an arborist will give.
Oh, I'd like that. Thank you, Dorie.
Yeah. Okay,
I hate to ask questions when I only attend half of the show, but did you talk about the human health issues of the gas stove in a house? You did.
No, and partly because I've just heard that it's as bad as living with a smoker, but I haven't read it for myself yet. And actually, in connection with fracking, one of the things Dorie didn't mention was or didn't really highlight is how bad that is for human health. I've heard several stories on NPR about families that live near fracking sites, and they're having high rates of skin diseases, of respiratory issues, of cancer. It's just appalling. I mean, I hadn't known that our gas comes from fracking, and I wish I didn't know it.
But you're right, Stephen. It's funny. I mean, we were all brought up to think that electric baseboards, electric heat is so expensive and gas cooking's better. And then, first of all, electric heat boards are old fashioned now. And there's this really modern heat pump technology that's really very mature. But then on the stupid stove issue, I had no idea that all these toxins are emitted when you're there putting your little espresso thing on or boiling some water. It's really staggering, and it's particularly bad for children. And so you can put the vent on and suck the air out, but apparently that's, it helps, but it's not great still. So the electric induction stoves apparently are just much healthier to have in your home. They're much
Absolutely.
They're much more energy efficient.
And when you say induction, you mean a flat surface that heats up? Is that what an induction oven is?
Well, Stephen, maybe you could say it more quickly.
Sure. I think what you're thinking about is the classic electric ceramic top that's flat. But that still uses resistance heating. You put your hand on it and you'll burn your hand. Induction heating operates in a totally different fashion. It excites the molecules in the pan, which the pan heats. And so it's much safer from that regard as well. But it's a totally different than typical electric resistance heating. And I don't really know which one uses the most kilowatt hours per cooking, if you will. Bill, do you know anything about that?
I think
No.
Induction uses less. I just want to mention, I didn't have much time to practice with the one that Anea lent me. And so I just put a pot of water on the stove and the same amount of water in a pot on the induction cooktop. And the one on the stove took 8 minutes to bring to a vigorous boil, and the one on the induction took 4. I know I've heard from a friend that it takes a little practice not to burn things, but it's very efficient.
It's also much better to control. You can get much lower temperatures than you can with the gas stove. So, you know, for many cooks, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it turns out the reason my daughter wants to change is really the slowness of a conventional electric stove. So I'm hoping she'll consider induction.
But may I talk? But the ones I've seen for the induction, I mean, it's just a plate. Do they have them like, could a restaurant have a huge induction stove? Are those available?
Yeah, and apparently there's some books now by famous chefs saying that induction is far superior to.
Yeah, because I was curious how all the restaurants are going to respond to getting rid of gas. I mean, for 100 years, chefs say, "Oh, you got to cook by gas. You can't cook by electric."
Yeah.
What are they saying about it, Dorie? Do you know?
All I know is there's some famous chefs that are spokespersons for the induction method. But I think it'd be fun to try and find a little webinar that we could all watch together on induction heating, and also on the topic of electrifying one's homes. I attended one and I was just blown away by some of the information, and things that I thought were big obstacles are not. And there's just a lot we have to learn, those of us who are older, I don't know. But
Well, I'll research that myself and find out if restaurants are using it and how they're using it. I've only seen it as like a little hot plate on the British baking show. They use it on the side to heat up, to make some thickener or something. But I've never seen a full stove that a restaurant would use.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Go ahead. I'm done.
I was just going to say, my family has bought a house and they're switching to induction, but that's the cooktop. I don't know what they're going to do about the oven part.
Yeah, I haven't gotten that far yet either.
No, but also my grandson, Ollie, had an induction, the kind that Barbara was just talking about, out in his dorm. And all the boys were cooking their dinners on it.
Yeah.
They love it. Everyone who has one, the 3 people I know love it.
Becky, you're on mute, but you had your hand up. It's funny how the mute button doesn't always cooperate.
I was going to just say our daughter has an induction cooktop and oven in Germany, and many people do. It's very popular there. I think one of the impediments here is that you do need specific cookware for it. You can't, I think most of your regular cookware is not going to work on the induction ovens that I've seen so far.
Well, if you happen to have cast iron pans, as I do, you're set already.
Ah, yes,
I'll tell you what I actually have a stove. I have 2 units, and one of them, friends have smelled gas, so I don't use that stove, and thought of replacing it with electric. For me, the cost was rewiring the electricity. The electricity is not powerful enough in that unit to support an electric stove, even an old electric stove.
But when I have cooked in her apartment, one thing I love is that it is very responsive. The oven is very quick. You control it nicely. And then the cooktop, you never have to worry about burning yourself, because the minute your pan goes off, it won't burn you.
Cynthia?
Hi, I'm wondering if there are any examples of cities or towns that have made this transition, perhaps in other countries. Becky, you just kind of made me think that maybe there's another country that has done this kind of thing, that's kind of ahead of the curve, because there's so many components that you've just presented to us. It just seems like enormous. All the investments and the stakeholders and the keeping things the way they are, making little changes, maybe like what you were suggesting, Betsy, kind of curious about why you're getting such responsiveness on Temple Street and the new gas lines. But so my question is, has anybody heard about other countries who have kind of made a switch away from natural gas?
Well, I know in the UK, UK is on its way, but it's putting a lot of money into hydrogen. So the idea is to replace the pipes with pipe that can take blended hydrogen, and you also typically have to replace the appliances and the burners to accept hydrogen. But it's determined that that's the way that it wants to go. But that's the UK, and actually National Grid is really active there. Hydrogen is an explosive gas also, like methane, and a lot of us here are very skeptical in the Gas Leaks Allies group about hydrogen. But I think there are, I don't know the names of it, but I think there are towns and villages in Northern Europe that have made this transition to all electrification, basically.
I read an article this morning about methane and how, I mean, I think the realization about how serious methane leaks are as part of the global emissions problem is fairly recent. And the fairly recent appreciation is that, I mean, this is carbon dioxide is used all, you know, it's all over the place. Methane is a fairly limited number of industries. And if you focused on those, it could have a very significant impact much more quickly than trying to deal with carbon dioxide. It doesn't last as long. It's worse at warming the earth, but it doesn't last as long. It's around for about 10 years instead of, I don't know, decades. And but I think my understanding from this article is that those kinds of recognitions are fairly new. So I think we're going to hear more and more about it. I mean, once I started learning about gas, I kept thinking, why don't we hear about this? But that's changing. Bill?
This is a little bit off topic. I'm thinking of cigarettes. Has anybody, you know, there's this very bright, attractive person that talks about natural gas and how much jobs it brings and how wonderful it is and how clean it is on television every night, on television that old people watch. And I think there's probably the basis for a major suit against the gas industries, because it's the same thing as cigarettes. They're concealing information on health hazards that are really, really significant. I didn't know anything about gas stoves emitting toxic and noxious subjects. I didn't know that.
I wish I could be more precise, but I heard on NPR yesterday that there have been such suits. The Supreme Court recently, there was a technical jurisdiction issue. So they didn't decide, you know, the merit of the suit that the utilities are lying to us. But some of the state attorneys general, or maybe in some cases, I think it was the city of Baltimore, I think, had made exactly the same kind of argument that you're suggesting. It's a very similar strategy that the utility companies have been applying. And Mothers Out Front recently reported that some school in Cambridge, her daughter brought home a coloring book from the gas company all about how good natural gas is. I mean, I think we all should talk about fossil gas, not natural gas. Apparently, there's a very large proportion of people who think it's a renewable source. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand that they think it's a nice, benign alternative to electricity. It's the other way around. It is past 4, so we should probably wind down, but so much to learn.
This has been excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
So just a reminder to stop recording. I don't know, maybe you did, but anyway, Kent